Today's guest is Tom Sterner, the founder and CEO of the Practicing Mind Institute. As a successful entrepreneur, Tom is an expert in present moment functioning, or PMF. He's a popular and in-demand speaker who works with industry groups and high-performance individuals, including athletes, to help them operate effectively in high-stress situations so they can achieve new levels of mastery. He's brought clarity to thousands so they can accomplish more with less effort, in less time, and with less stress. And that just sounds amazing. He's the author of the bestseller, The Practicing Mind, Developing Focus and Discipline in Your Life, and Fully Engaged, Using the Practicing Mind in Daily Life. Before founding the Practicing Mind Institute, he served as the chief concert piano technician for a major performing arts center, preparing instruments for the most demanding performances. During his 25-year tenure, he personally worked with such legendary performers as Cliburn, Pavarotti, Andre Watts, Ray Charles, Tony Bennett, Fleetwood Mac, Raitt and Wynton Marasalis. I mean, that's just a who's who right there. Tom Sterner, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Hey, thanks, Chris. It's great to be here.
So, Tom, I invited you to join us today because I'm eager to learn about present moment functioning and the Practicing Mind Institute. But you have to tell us first about your previous professional life. We just went through the who's who there, the Hall of Famers. What inspired you to become a concert piano technician, and what did you love most about that work?
I was actually at the University of Delaware in a completely unrelated major. I was studying to be, I was in turf and horticulture, and I was studying to be like a greenskeeper, a green superintendent in golf. And I went into that because it was like my senior year in high school, and didn't have the faintest idea what I was going to do. And went to the guidance counselor, and he said, well, what do you do during the summer? I said, I usually work in people's yards. He said, okay, why don't you get a degree in that? And I said, sounds good to me. And so off I went. But I've been a musician my whole life. And my father was brilliant from a mechanical standpoint. And my mother was highly disciplined and very detail oriented. And those two things worked very good in the trade that when I went into the piano thing. So what my father noticed was that I really wasn't all that interested in my major. I completed the major. And so he, on a whim, said, why don't you become a piano technician? He said, you love music, you love the piano, you're mechanically inclined, and seems like a good fit. And that's when I really, started into that. And it was a 30-year time. And it's very difficult to explain to people the amount of work there is in just in tuning a piano. The repetition is just out of this world. There's 88 of everything, at least, in a piano. And so, there's maybe it varies a little bit from piano to piano, but it's about 235 strings, in the instrument. And if you're going to tune that piano, you're going to have to touch the tuning pin for each one of those strings several times. And that's just in one tuning. And when you're doing, seven or eight tunings in a day, it's an incredible amount of redundant work. It's physically demanding. Piano technicians struggle with a lot of joint problems because it's hard on your joints. So anyway, I got into that, and I was at the right place at the right time. It was a very octogenaric trade. Everybody that was in it was my father's age or older. I would go to these conferences and I'd end up dancing with these guys' wives because none of them wanted to dance, and there was no young guys there. And so I stuck out, and I ended up, doing very, very well in it. I took to the trade and I scored very high on their test, and I had all of my ratings that were available by the time I was 22 or 23. And then these guys began retiring, and they just gave me their work. So my business became very, very big in a very short period of time without a whole lot of effort on my part. But I also had skills that many of the people in the area did not have. So I became really highly in demand, and that some of the concert guys that were doing that work, they basically vouched for me. They would just say, look, this is I'm retiring, and this is who you need. So I got into that there. And as you said earlier, over the next about 25 years was when I was highly involved in that. I worked in like a 4-state area, and I did meet all these people. I sat in their trailers with them. I'd be working on keyboards in their trailers while they were talking about what they were going to do in the show. I'd be in the green room with them, or sometimes in their dressing room. They'd invite me in, and we'd just sit around and hang out. I got a lot of respect from the performers because they respected my trade as much as I respected theirs. And they really appreciated a high-level technician that could do their job. And I actually was fortunate enough that I had some performers over those years would, in the middle of the show, would stop and tell the audience, "You're very fortunate to have Tom as your technician, because we travel all over the world, and finding good technicians is a difficult thing." So it was demanding, and really the reason I got out of it was because at the time it was not scalable, meaning that when I first got into it, I thought, well, hey, the problem here is I don't have enough clients to stay busy all the time. And let's just say that number's 1,000 people. And I thought, well, if I could just get 1,000 people in my books, then I would be working at full capacity all the time. Well, not coming from a business family, it never occurred to me, well, what happens when you have 2,000 people? And that's what happened. I just kept attracting more business, but I couldn't get to the money because I was the business. I couldn't hire people to do the work, and everybody wanted me to come out. And so it just got to a point where I was working 65, 70 hours a week and running through 4 states. And I just said, this isn't how I want to spend the rest of my life. So that was the impetus really to begin looking at something else. And that's where the practicing mind came in, because I had been studying. I had studied from the time I was a teenager. I had studied a lot of Eastern thought. I had got into sports psychology, and then later neuroscience, and then consciousness studies, science of consciousness, now, and hypnosis and heart math and all these things. And I was really fascinated. I was always kind of a solitudinal kid. I wasn't a hermit, but I did enjoy being by myself and thinking. And that was a piano technician spends, especially a concert piano technician, spends the whole day by themselves. They're let in a room with a big piano, and when I would come into the theater, they might be setting stuff up, but everybody would just leave, and the stage would be mine, and there'd be like a single spotlight on me so I could see in the piano, and I would just work by myself until I was finished. So you spend a lot of time by yourself. You're working at a job that's highly repetitious, and I had to learn a way to finish. The person at the end of the day was paying me just as much as the person that was getting me first thing in the morning. And so I had to figure out a way of keeping my mind fresh, not getting bored, and keeping my motivation and my mental and emotional stamina up. And that was the reason why I was so attracted to all the things that eventually became the first book.
So we'll get to your new business and your books in a minute, but a couple of things here. So you talked about sitting at the piano with just a spotlight on you. Did you ever just sit there like you're in concert and just break out into song and just start playing the keyboard?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would go in. I have my own keys to the concert hall, and I would go in at sometimes I'd have to go in at 4:35 in the morning, because they would not realize they needed a piano prepared for that day. And the only way I could fit it in my schedule, my remanufacturing work was booked for 3 to 4 years. And my door-to-door service was booked several months, and I wouldn't go past that, because then you had trouble with people forgetting and not being there. So there were times where I would have to go into the theater very early in the morning, and I might go in at 4:30, 5 o'clock, and I would just flip a spotlight on and sit there and play for 2 hours. Before I would, because I did play professionally, when I was younger. I played up until I was maybe 40. I played professionally too, as a side hustle. So yes, I loved, I was a very big into composing and orchestrating. And so I loved to sit down on the piano and play. And it was, of course, I was playing really, really nice pianos. So yes, that was part of the perks of the job.
Another question I have for you, mentioned a few moments ago of dancing with your colleagues' wives at conferences. There were concert piano technician conferences?
Oh, yes. The Piano Technicians Guild is, an international, it's a global organization that teaches and tests piano technicians, because the problem with piano technicians is that there's no way to really. You can have people that come out to your house that know absolutely nothing and are self-taught, and you can have people that come out that are highly, highly trained, and they're both they're both online. So the guild was formed in I think 1957, and they originally, when I was first tested, I was tested by a grill master I didn't realize what he was going to do was hand me all of his business, which was why he was, grilling me. But he was very difficult. But you also had situations where, dads were training their sons, and yeah, it's good. He knows how to do it. It was not a good situation. So they eventually, probably in the 80s, I think, they came up with a computer scored test, which was very, very accurate. And initially they found that a lot of guys that had what used to be their highest rating, which was the Craftsman rating, could not pass with a very high level of tuning. But no one had ever actually heard them tune, and they had never really been scored by an objective observer. So the people were upset about that. So anyway, yes, the guild is like that, and they have conferences all over the world. And I used to go all around the country and spend a week here or there, like studying with all different people on all different aspects of piano maintenance, piano remanufacturing, concert work, whatever.
In the start of the show, I went through the who's who of famous musicians you've worked with. Do you have a favorite or two among them, or a favorite story or two to share?
Well, there were many that were, I would say, were for the most part, they're just regular people. And they, there was only one or two that to me had a poor attitude, and it wasn't something that was aimed at me. It was usually aimed at the people in their entourage, but they were just very unprofessional. But in general, they were just, they would like to sit down and talk with you. They were like, you might run across the street and get them Chinese food or something, when they were sitting there, because they would smell the Chinese food, and oh man, I would love some. I'd say, I'll go get you some. What do you want? So I had a really good rapport. But I would say the one person that would be my favorite, which is a bit of a story, would not be the person you would think. There was a man, and I'm not going to name him, but he was a very highly regarded classical pianist. And he came in one time, and at the time I didn't realize it, but he had a problem with alcoholism. And so he was prone to mood swings. And he came in and he was infuriated by the concert piano. Didn't like it, didn't like anything about it. And I got there, and the stage manager said, "This guy's really upset with the piano." And I said, "Okay, that's my job." So he said, "Well, I'm going to go up there with you." And I said, "You don't need to do that." He goes, "Yeah, I need to do that." Well, when I got up there, this guy just laid into me and, was, you really couldn't talk to him. He was so emotional. And when he left, the stage manager said, "I wanted you to have a witness in case something here comes back to you." So, well, it did. He went back and said that guy should be fired. Well, I hadn't even worked on the piano yet, and so the manager of the theater said, "Wait a minute, we've had Tom for years and we've never had a problem. Something's not right here." And then he called in the stage manager. So that got taken care of. I did fix the piano. The guy played. And then about 2 years later, he came back. And the practice that they had was to store the piano, the concert grand, underneath of the stage, because it took up a lot of room. And they had all kinds of shows there. They had ballets. Sometimes they had movie night. They had a lot of things in the theater. And so they would, to get the piano out of the way, and so that it also wasn't damaged, they would store it under the stage. But the problem with that was, piano is wood and felt, and it has a lot of expansion coefficients in it that are affected by humidity swings and all that, and temperature changes. And so the piano would get really out of whack when it was underneath the stage. It would sound terrible. The touch would be very uneven. And so what they would do was when they were going to have a really specific high-level pianist, they would bring it up onto stage several days ahead of time to let it acclimate again. And then I would come in and spend maybe 6 or 7 hours on it before the performer would actually sit and touch it. So that was the plan. I was supposed to come in at around 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. This guy was supposed to come in at around 5 and play the piano. And then I was supposed to stay and then, tweak anything that, he was concerned about. Well, he got into town Friday night and walked over to the theater, and they had a young new stagehand there who let him in, which was a good idea. And the guy sat down at the piano. The piano was cacophonious. It was horrible. And he had remembered the piano from before. And so he was just infuriated. And and he's yelling at the kid and telling him your technician's a jerk and stupid and all these sort of things. And so, not knowing what else to do, the kid called me at home and he said, what should I do? I said, well, I'll come in now. Tell him that I'll come in now. So here's a really important lesson for the listeners. When I left my house, my first impulse was to be infuriated with this kid because he was not supposed to let this guy on the piano, because I thought this kid has dropped me down a rabbit hole that is really going to be difficult to climb out of. This guy hates the piano. He hates me, and I'm going to have to turn that around. Now, that was a very brief thought that I had, but this goes back to what I wrote about in The Practicing Mind and Present Moment Functioning. And my latest book, It's Just a Thought. I immediately was aware that I was having this thought system. I tell people, look, you're not your thoughts. You're the one who has thoughts. Some thoughts you do create, but most of the thoughts happen to you. And this thought was happening to me. And so I thought, this is not taking me where I need to go right now. So I thought to myself on the way into the concert hall, if I could experience this situation any way I wanted, what would that be? I need to know that before I walk onto stage and this guy comes out. I need to know that because I won't be able to find it in the middle of the emotional content that's bound to happen. And so I thought to myself, well, I can't control him. I can only control how I process him. I can't control how he processes what I say to him. And I can't control how he reacts to how I process him. So I thought the one thing I can control is myself. So what am I going to focus on? I'm going to focus on my inner peace. I'm not going to let him touch my inner peace. So I know he's going to go off on the rails. He's going to get crazy. That I know. So I'm just going to watch my inner peace when he's doing that. And that's what I'm going to pay attention to. And that's what I'm basically going to stay adjusting. So I get to the place. I walk in and I start stripping the piano out on mutes and getting ready to tune it first, is just so I can see what I have. And here he comes. Somebody told him I was there, and he comes and he's breathing fire. And so I thought the best thing here is to strike first, because he's really angry. So I introduced myself to him and I said, the first thing I have to say is I have to apologize that somebody of your accomplishment had to put up with this piano. I said, you were not supposed to see this piano or hear this piano or touch this piano until I spent 6 hours on it. I explained to him how the piano was stored. I said, and let me say this, I understand why you're upset. I said, this is a solo performance. It's not with an orchestra. I said, it's just you and the piano. And I said, it doesn't matter how many hours you've practiced, what your level of proficiency is, you need the piano to be transparent. It needs to get out of the way so that you can express whatever repertoire you're playing fluently and as effortlessly as possible. And if you can't do that, the audience isn't going to know it's the piano. They're going to think it's you. And they're going to think you can't play. You're going to get bad reviews. I said, and you're out there by yourself and nobody knows. And while I'm saying this, Chris, this guy, his body language is changing. Everything is changing. And then he interrupts me and he says, what did you say your name was? I said, it's Tom. And he said, Tom, no one has ever gotten it like this. He goes, I can't believe this. He goes, I'm totally comfortable with you after this conversation. I said, well, why don't you get down to your dressing room, hang out. I said, unless you want to go back to the hotel. I said, because this is going to take me a couple hours. He goes, I'll be downstairs. He said, I'll take a nap or whatever. I can hang out. I went down after I worked on the piano and I said, I'm done. I'd like you to come up first pass. And he said, I don't need to. I said, you don't need to? He goes, nope, I don't need to. He said, I know enough about you to know that I trust you. He said, I'll be fine. And so he played this performance, which was great reviews and everything was great. Now, the story doesn't end there, but I thought to myself, now there was a split second where I was at a fork in the road and I had to make a decision as to how do I want to process this situation? What can I control? What can't I control? And I was aware, thought awareness, I was aware of my thoughts. And so because of that, if I had gone in there and gotten in this guy's face and all that, it would have ruined my day. It would have ruined his day. He would have put in a terrible performance. The people wouldn't have gotten their money's worth. All these things would have happened that didn't happen because of this very split-second decision that I made that couldn't have happened if I wasn't aware it was an option. Now, he left there, and another 2 years later, he came to another concert hall, and they called me to come do their piano when he was there. And when I walked into that theater, he was up on the stage playing, and he was sitting there playing, had his head down, was playing, and I walked down between, in the aisle and got to where the stage was, and he turned and he saw me and he said, "Oh, I am so glad it's you." Like, he said, "Tom, I'm so glad to see you, and I'm so grateful that you're the guy who's going to work on this." And I said, "Well, how is it?" He said, "It's okay." He said, "You'll work your magic. I'll be fine." And then he said, "Are you coming to the show?" And I said, "Well," I said, "I didn't even know you were in town." I said, "I would have loved to." I said, "But I don't have a ticket." He said, "I'll have a ticket for you at the office." He goes, "Front row." He said, "Please come on me." So we had this was a relationship that started out, several, maybe 6 years before that, where the guy was just screaming at me. And now we're friendly with each other and we have mutual respect. So like I said, that was, you asked me who my favorite person was. Well, there was a lot of people I sat down with and I had very lovely conversations with, but I learned a lot from that guy and from the opportunity that that whole scenario presented to me.
That is an incredible story. And it's actually a perfect segue now into what we really want to talk about. I'm so interested in present moment functioning. Did you develop PMF or did it exist before? What's its history?
Present moment functioning has been around for thousands of years in the East. I mean, they have understood, Zen mind. They understand that there is only the now. But the difficulty that we have now, it began to be studied in sports probably in the 1980s, because people don't realize that, sports psychology hadn't coalesced into what it is now. I mean, now it's a very big thing. Nobody's competitive without it. But what we know now, it's irrefutable, is that when you are functioning in the present moment, when you are completely absorbed in what is in front of you, where your feet are, what you're doing right now and nothing else, you are working at your highest level, your highest potential. You're going to accomplish whatever the task is in the least amount of time and with the least amount of effort, and you will not experience the sense of resistance to this moment, because that's what impatience is. It's a resistance to this moment, because when you're resisting the present moment, what it is you're thinking about something you're going to do later, like something you're not doing right now. And you can only do what you're doing right now. You can think about other things, but you physically can only work on what you're doing right now. So what I had noticed about myself in high school was that I was very undisciplined, and I would get involved, and I had all these things I wanted to do. I was very creative. I had a very creative mind, and that's the downside of a creative mind, because it's always looking at potential. Everything is a potential. I could learn to play the piano. I could be a gymnast. I can do. It's always looking, and it's interpreting that as like, not. I don't know if I would say shiny objects, but it's like stuff. I want it all. I want to do all these things. And what would happen is that I would start on the path, like piano. I wanted to play piano. I wanted to be a jazz piano player, and I'd have all this enthusiasm, and I'd say, I'm going to do this. And then what would happen is I would burn up that initial enthusiasm and stamina, and then I would fall into where everybody falls. And I wanted everything that practice was going to give me. I just didn't want to practice. And so it really, because I'm a problem solver by nature, it became apparent to me that, look, you're never going to reach your potential if you don't finish what you start. And to do that, you're going to have to find a way of interpreting the experience differently, because this experience is just it. For some reason, it just was apparent to me that the experience is neither boring or exciting. It's just the experience, and you can interpret it however you want. And you're interpreting it in the wrong way, and that's why you don't feel like doing it. But if you just let go of everything and this one, and just you're going to spend just this one moment doing this, that feeling of when am I going to be done? I got to, like, when you put. I always tell people, look, when you attach yourself mentally and emotionally to a point in the future when you have your goal, you immediately put yourself at war with the process of achieving it. And you spend pretty much 98% of your life in the process and the experience of achieving all of your goals. So it makes a lot of sense to learn to find the joy that is present in that, because that's where the real joy, when you run a race, why does the race feel so satisfying when you cross the finish line? It's because of everything you just did, like all the struggle, all the training. That's where the value, that's what creates the value. If I just take a piece of chalk and draw it on the street and say, there's the finish line, go ahead and step over it, it means nothing. And so when we can get that through our head and realize that, look, when you feel like you're struggling with something, all that's telling you is there's a feeling. We call that feeling struggling. It's, but that's just a label that we try to take what we're feeling and put it into a linguistic form. But it's just data. That's all it is data. It's information. And what is that information really telling you? It's telling you that you're up against your threshold. You don't think about things you're good at. The things you're good at flow past you easily. They don't take any effort. The things that when you're up against your threshold, you feel that I can't do this. I can sort of do it. Sometimes I can do it. Sometimes I can't do it. It's quote difficult. But all that feeling of difficult is telling you is, hey, you're right up against your threshold. And isn't that where you want to be? I mean, because otherwise you're not going anywhere. So to me, when you reinterpret that feeling of it's just data, it's just telling me that. So an example that I give of that, I think, which is as a musician, which is pretty easy to understand, is when you go to take a piano lessons and you've never played piano, you've never played anything, and you go and on the very first day, you have the instructor says, okay, here's what the notes look like on the manuscript paper. And this is a C, and this is a D, and this is where it is on the keyboard if you're playing piano. This is where it is on your instrument here. You press it with this finger. And, this is a quarter note. This is an eighth note, and you're up against your threshold. You can't do it. You don't understand it. That's where you're at, that you can't go past that because you have to master that first. Now, so what does that feel like inside? It feels like it's a feeling that we call difficult, so what happens 5 years down the road when you've been practicing and now you're playing either pop music that you like, intermediate music or an intermediate classical piece? What does that feel like then? It feels the same. It feels the same because you're always working on music that is at your threshold. As soon as you master one piece, you don't go back and play the silly Crunchy Flake song or whatever it was that you started out with. Like, you don't want to play that stuff anymore, because it's like, I remember my daughter one time when she was in 6th or 7th grade, we were in the car and she played this music. She said, Dad, you got to hear this music. And she played it for me. And I said, that's nice. And she said, yeah, I know that's nice. She said, but it doesn't really do anything for you, does it? I said, no, it doesn't. And she said, why? And I said, well, let me ask you something. I said, do you remember the books you were reading in 1st grade? Like, the Cat in the Hat Sat and all that kind of stuff. I said, yeah. I said, why don't you read them? And she goes, because they're dumb. I said, exactly. I said, I'm way past that music. I'm sorry. Like I said, that music is so infantile. I said, I passed that a long time ago. I'm not telling you not to listen to it. I'm just telling you, for me, it's like sitting there and reading, the Cat in the Hat. I just can't do it. And so it's the same thing. We're always up against our threshold, and it's where we want to be. But again, if we interpret that as this is hard, this is difficult. Well, everything you can't do creates that data, that feeling of data, and you really could look at that and go, oh, I love this. This is exactly where I want to be, because I'm pushing my abilities farther than they were before. And that's where I want to be. I don't want to just be doing the stuff I did before. I want to be getting better. I want to be getting better. And that's, it really comes down. I really harp on the mantra, interpretation creates your experience, and your experience will impact your performance. So pay attention to that. Stop interpreting something that is difficult as being bad, because that's your interpretation. I can say, tomorrow you got to get up and speak in front of 1,000 people. Some people would say, I can't wait. I got so much to say. Somebody else says, that's my worst nightmare. I don't want to do that. But speaking in front of the people is not, it's just speaking in front of the people. It's just an opportunity to speak in front of the people. And I should say that this stuff, Chris, goes into everything in life. I have been through a lot of things. I've had money, I've been broke, I've been divorced, I have lost numerous people in my family, some of them very young to cancer. I've, took care of my father, hand to hand in the last, several months of his life. I've been through a lot of different situations that many people go through. And I can tell you that understanding this stuff is a total game changer. You do have an opportunity to change your interpretation of even the most serious, what we would call the most serious situations. And when you have the thought awareness and you can do that and you have the mechanics and you understand them, then what happens is you can be the person you want to be for those people in those moments.
So you just mentioned PMF being a game changer. Is that something we can quickly master, or does it take time?
Well, there are levels of it, like just like playing the piano. That's like saying, can I learn to play the piano quickly? Well, how good do you want to play? The first thing you have to learn, it's a skill. It's a skill. Everything in life is a skill, Chris. I don't care whether it's learning to button your shirt, learning to get the spoon from the bowl into your mouth when you're 2 years old. I mean, everything is a skill. And as soon as we master the skill, we stop thinking about it and we move on to more difficult skills to master. And we are if you go back 150 years ago where you lived on a ranch and you had to go into town, it was 10 miles away, and you were clipping and clopping on your horse by yourself, there wasn't a lot of things to distract you. You were just out in nature and you were walking, your mind was pretty slow. There wasn't a lot of stimulus, but we're in a whole different situation now. Our clock has sped up. I mean, even if you go back, like say 100 years ago, you got on a ship to go over to England, you'd be like, it's like 2.5 weeks. Man, we are really moving. Can you imagine that? 2.5 weeks, we're going to be in England. Now you get on a plane that's like, oh gosh, it's 6 hours to get to London. I just can't believe it. Like, what am I going to do? Our concept of time is very, very distorted. And no matter how fast we go, we want to go faster. And no matter how much we stick in our day, we want to stick more in our day. And so because of that, we look at the process of learning a skill is something we have to endure. So that we just want to have the skill, we just want to have the skill and be able to use the skill. But again, what makes the skill so rewarding is to overcome the lack of skill. So like I said, but the first thing you have to do is you have to understand, well, what are the mechanics? Because I need to know what to practice. It's like, I don't play very much golf anymore, but I was very serious about it at one time, and I had a lot of lessons. And I still go to the driving range, and I'm amused at when I watch people, because they have the most horrible fundamentals that they are working very hard to install into their subconscious. But they don't know it. But they are practicing. They're repeating things that are not going to serve them on the golf course over and over and over again. And then they're expecting something to be different when they get on the golf course. And basically their subconscious mind is giving them exactly what they told it to give them. So to me, understanding how do I get out of this loop? How do I learn to become practicing, or to be, to become part of the practicing mind, and to use those mechanics? How do I know what to repeat? And learning to relax and stop feeling so attached to a goal is an important part of that.
Well, to that point, a moment ago, you just mentioned about today's world going faster, trying to stick more in a day. How can present moment functioning help us with stress and anxiety management?
Well, ironically, if you're in the present, you won't feel the stress. The stress comes from this feeling of, I'm not where I need to be. We all have a feeling of incompleteness, and we interpret that feeling of being, it's because I'm not where I need to be. I need to be over there. I need to have this. I need to have that. And all of that is reinforced constantly with marketing. And so when we begin to learn, when we give ourselves permission to just experience this moment, that's when we realize the value of it. And here's another short story from my piano technician days, which again, I wrote about in it's the one I get asked the most about in regarding the practicing mind. I was overloaded. As I said earlier, I was working, sometimes I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd get my kids up. I might have to go into the concert hall, then get back to the house and get them up, get their breakfast, get them to school, etc. And then I work, and then I come home, have dinner with them, maybe help them with their homework. And then sometimes I would go back over to my shop and work until midnight, 1 in the morning, and come home, fall in bed. And then it would all start again. It was exhausting. And to be quite honest, I don't know how I did it. Like, I couldn't do it now. But, I remember one day I had to tune 2 pianos in the concert hall. One was for the soloist, and then there was one actually in the orchestra score. And now I had been tuning those pianos for decades, and I knew exactly how long it took. I knew what was involved in it. And I would, in these processes, I would tune them maybe 10 times in a week. And this day, my whole schedule was catching up with me. I was exhausted. I just wanted to exhale. I wanted a day off, and I just couldn't have it. I had too much work. So I made this decision. I don't know what made me make this decision, but I said, you know what? I can't have a day off, but I'm tired of running. I feel like I'm running all the time, and I'm always in a hurry and trying to do too much. So this particular call, I'm by myself. I'm going to be in the concert hall by myself. I am going to go methodically slow, very intentionally slow with everything that I do. And I took all of my phone, my watch, anything that had a clock on it, I took out, and I left it in the van. And I was very intentional and mindful as I walked to the theater, and then even when I got in the theater, I had my own keys. I got in the theater. As I walked up the steps, each step was very intentional, very mindful. I thought, I'm going to be so ridiculous with this, but I just have to do this. I just owe it to myself. I'm going to give myself permission to do this. And if people get mad at me because I'm late, I can't help it. So then when I got in there, I was used to running up the steps, opening my toolbox, grabbing fistfuls of tools, putting them in the piano and stripping the thing out with the mutes and all this sort of stuff. This time I took one tool at a time. There's no reason to do that, but except to be slow. And I took the one tool at a time, and I was extremely methodical, and I went through this tuning very, very slowly. And then normally I would grab all the tools and go over to the other piano with fistfuls of tools and drop in there. But instead, I packed every tool up one by one in the toolbox, walked over there, did the same thing. Now, I'm thinking, while I'm doing it, when I first started to do this, my ego was screaming at me in panic. It's like, you are creating such a mess for you for the rest of the day. And I just said, I don't care. I'm just doing this. And a strange thing happened. My shoulders started to drop. I started to feel relaxed. I started to feel kind of blissful, just kind of happy and comfortable. I hadn't had that feeling in a long time. I didn't feel so keyed up and, gritting my teeth and all that. And then when I walked out, I told myself, stay with it until you get back in the van. And I walked very slowly out of the van. When I looked at my clocks, I had gained a half an hour. I could not believe it. I just absolutely, this can't be true. But all the clocks agreed. And what I realized with that was, by being in the present moment, all of my focus was only on what I was doing right then. It was my mind and my cognitive abilities were all accessible. They weren't scattered and pulled in all these different tasks with switch tasking, thinking about this and thinking about that. And so my actions, even in the tuning process, was very accurate. Instead of, moving the wrench, 10 times to find the right place, it was 1, 2, and it was there. I wasn't even aware of that. At the time, it was only in retrospect. So I followed that for the rest of the day. And I ended up being able to stop at a restaurant and eat instead of buying a sandwich at a convenience store and spill it on me on the van while I'm driving. I mean, all these, it was such a pleasure. And I always teach that to people. Look, learn to be in this moment. I said, one way you can do it, like I said, is to trick yourself. Like if you're right-handed, brush your teeth in the morning with your left hand. I said, you'll find that, you don't have the coordination for it. I said, and so your mind has to put all of its attention on that. Like it can't be when you're doing it with your running, you're doing this, but you're thinking about all the stuff you're going to do today, because that has become so habitual. It's a skill that the subconscious is installed, and it doesn't need you to be there. Like, but if you go with something like using your left hand, it forces you to be in this moment while you're doing that. So in terms of, to get back to your original thing, is it gives you the byproduct of it is it gives you freedom from stress. It gives you, because, if you didn't think, could you feel stress? No, because stress is in thinking. Like, you have to have thoughts in order to feel stress. You have the thoughts, and then the hormones are released, and, then you experience, the all of the content of the hormones, which is what, creates the emotion. So my point is that when you have less and less thoughts, when you thin out and you become in control of the thoughts that you're having, or at least most of them, that stuff goes away. And it's just, it's always been here. It's like electricity. It's always been here. It's just that we haven't used it. And we didn't even know we could use it. We didn't even know it was available. But now you go back 500 years ago, they didn't know about electricity. And if you told them about it, they would have said, what? It's invisible. You can't show it to me. I can't touch it. Like, no, it doesn't exist. Like, now we know. There's so much we know now about how the mind works. And we know you're really seeing it in sports, because they exhausted the physical. They knew what nutrition does. They knew what the physicality does. But they peaked in that, and they said, yeah, but we still can't get somebody to perform at the highest level, even though physically they're there and nutritionally they're there. We can't get them to focus to function at their highest level in any kind of consistency. Why is that? Because all performance starts in the mind, and that was why they put so much money and effort into it.
Freedom from stress. That's a novel idea. I love that.
Yeah, and it is possible. I mean, I can say. An example I've given, I had a CEO one time who said, we were having this conversation, and he said, well, I don't think I agree with that. He said, I don't think that there are thoughts that happen that I don't actually create and that I'm in control of. He said, I think I'm in control of my thinking. And to knock him off guard, I said, did I tell you to talk? You need to sit there and just shut your mouth until I tell you to talk. And as soon as I did that, he reacted the way you would expect. And I said, you see that? I said, did you make a decision to feel the way you feel right now? And it was just this total epiphany for this guy. He said, thank you for the awakening. He said, you're right. He said, I just reacted. He said, I didn't make a decision about anything. It just happened to me. I said, that's right. I said, it just happened to you. I said, and that's where you live all day long. 95% of the time, neuroscience says 95% of the day, we are being thought instead of us thinking. We just do it all the time, so it feels normal. And we think that we are thinking, but actually we're just living programming that we and other people have installed into our subconscious throughout our life.
Let's switch gears to your books. In your book, Fully Engaged, Using the Practicing Mind in Daily Life, you write about thought awareness training and setting goals with accurate data. And you've talked about data a few times. What is thought awareness training, and how is it different from present moment functioning?
Well, you can't become present moment in your functioning if you're not aware of what your mind is doing without your permission. I mean, one time with a bunch of high schoolers I was doing a class with, I told them, I'm going to put a timer on. I want you to close your eyes and stop thinking for 2 minutes, just 2 minutes. And of course, I knew they couldn't do it, but they didn't know that they couldn't do it. I mean, they were so used to having a mind that was full of chatter and running all over the place and hyperactive that they thought that was them. And so when they stopped and they started trying to will their mind to stop, it wouldn't obey them. And so when the 2 minutes came up and they came out of it, it was like this big epiphany. I mean, they were all talking to each other. I couldn't do it. And I said, what did you just learn? And they looked at me. I said, what? I said, what you learned is that if you're telling your mind, the real you is telling your mind, stop thinking, and it says, no, I'm going to do it anyway. I said, who's in control? Because it's not you. I said, and that was such an awakening for these young people. And they wanted more because they had had just enough of a taste of a mind that wasn't as active, even if they couldn't get their mind way down, that it just felt so restful. And they weren't experiencing the hyperness and the tension and all that sort of stuff. And so many of them went on to meditation practices. So like I said, the very first thing you have to do, you cannot change what your mind is thinking. You can't change the automatic responses that you're getting if you're not aware that they're happening. And if you're in them, if you're in the reactions, like the CEO that I just mentioned, if you're in the emotional content of the thought that is being fired off by your subconscious, you don't have the privilege of choice. You're just going along for the ride. So you have to get outside of that loop. And that's what thought awareness training is. And it's really, really very simple. There's all kinds of forms of meditation. I've done many kinds of meditation. And people will ask, was it like, a guided meditation? And my answer is no. The problem, guided meditations have much to offer, but not for this, because guided meditations ask you to think, focus on your feet, calm your mind, you feel your legs relax. I mean, I don't want that. I want you to stop thinking and notice what your mind is doing without your permission. So generally I have people, sit upright in a chair, like a high back chair, like a dining room chair or something like that, with their feet flat on the floor, close their eyes with their spine erect. Really what we're aiming for is no distractions from physical discomfort. And also, you don't want your head falling down because it promotes drowsiness. So you want your head, to be level. You close your eyes and try to look up a little bit with your eyeballs. Not so much that it tires your eyes out, but just a little bit, rather, because you'll find that your eyes will want to drop down. And again, it can create drowsiness. And then you have one of two systems. You can either tell your mind that I want you to notice my body breathing. That's all I want you to focus on. And the reason we give our mind one task is so that we have a point of relativity as to whether it's doing the task. And we want a very simple point of relativity. So either just watch your body breathe, or you can say a simple phrase or hear it. You don't actually say it, but you just hear it in your head. And that can be anything positive. I'm still, I'm quiet, I'm at peace. I don't want a long sentence. I just want something that is very simple and positive in nature. And I tell people, look, this is what's going to happen. I said, usually initially you start trying to control your breathing because you never paid attention to it before. And now your ego's involved and it starts to think like, well, maybe I should breathe deeper. Maybe I should breathe slower. If you just let go of all that and let your body take over, it's been doing it your whole life anyway. It knows how to do it. But what will happen very quickly is the mind, which is a problem-solving machine, will say, this is really boring. I know how to do this. So while you do this, I'm going to go work on what we're doing this afternoon, or I'm going to think about what I should have said to that person yesterday, or whatever it is, and it takes off. And you go with it because you've always gone with it. And then there is this microsecond where you wake up. And when you wake up in that microsecond, you realize that my mind has taken over. I'm with my mind and I'm doing this stuff. I'm no longer in charge. I'm no longer the noticer. I'm not the observer. I'm in the drama of whatever the mind is doing. And that people get discouraged in that because they think like I failed. But that is the mind, and that is your relationship to it. And it's perfectly normal. And that's where all the magic happens, because in that moment where that happens, what is happening is you have dropped back into the observer and out of the mind, because you have to be the observer to notice that your mind isn't doing what you told it to. So there's two things that happen there. One is your self-awareness grows, and your willpower grows, because you have to pull your mind back on task. And that is the skill. The skill is that interplay between those two, noticing when the mind takes off, pulling, and having the willpower to pull it back. And so when people say to me, like, I'm not very good at this because all I do is chase my mind. Yeah, well, so join the club. Like, that's what everybody does. Like, including, monks in Tibet. Like, it's normal. Some days your mind will be relatively placid. It depends on what's going on in your life. Other times it will be very difficult to pull the mind, to pull your consciousness onto what's your mind, to be the observer, because you might be feeling stress. And stress is just it's just a thought. That's all it is a thought. And that thought is caught because you're in the thought. You're not the thought. When you're feeling nervous, you're not nervous. You're experiencing a nervous thought. You are outside of that. It's a very difficult concept, But what happens is, as you begin to experience being the observer, you begin to see that. There's an old thing. There's a difference between a belief and a knowing. A belief is something you haven't experienced yet, but it seems to make sense. But there's always a certain amount of doubt that is baked into it because you haven't actually had a conscious experience of it. So it's kind of like, riding a bike. If you've never ridden a bike, you can say, yeah, get on it, pedal it, the gyroscopic forces will keep it. You can do that. And the person gets on the bike, but there's all this trepidation because they have not experienced riding a bike. And so it doesn't matter how much they believe it. They still have to wrestle with the fact that it's not a conscious knowing. Once they ride around on the bike and they get it, now it's a knowing. And that's what happens with this. When you begin to move from, I'm telling you this works, I'm telling you this is going to happen, but you haven't experienced it. When you begin to experience this, then it becomes a knowing. And you might not be able to hold on to it. That's the skill, initially, but you get enough of it that you realize this is real. And because it's real, I want more of it. I want more control of it. I want to be more in charge of it. I want to be able to call it at will. So when I notice that my mind, and I've told my subconscious that when that person walks in the room, I'm supposed to feel really upset. Well, that's just a behavioral habit. I have a choice. I can decide just as easily not to be upset when that person walks in the room and not surrender my inner peace to that person just because they walked into the room. I can do that. The first thing you have to do is be able to not be in that drama. You have to be outside of it. And that's what thought awareness does. It gives you the privilege of choice. Once you have that, now you got to aim it somewhere. And that's something else that, we get into. I'm not a coach that works with people for years. I don't think this stuff is that complicated. And I don't think it should take that long to get to a point where you can basically coach yourself. I think it's really understanding what the mechanics are. And I think what is helpful initially in the first, 4 or 6 sessions, whatever, is really just having someone point out, how do you aim this at this particular situation? I always I tell people, bring something you're struggling with, to the first session, and I'll show you how this works, but because our reactions to situations are so habitual, which is part of the problem, if you don't have someone outside of that, someone who's objective watching it and just kind of, it's like the kid in the toy store, they always want to run off and you got to grab them and pull it back. No, look, remember what we talked about here? So you see how you're doing that right here? And they go, oh yeah, geez. And I see that all the time. I'm looking at these people on the screen. I'll go you see that? And they're like, yeah, I can't believe I missed that. Yeah, I am doing exactly what you just said. Okay, I got it. And they're taking notes. So like I said, it's a skill. All skills start at no skill and they move along a line of mastery. And you can interpret the experience and the process of mastery any way you want. You can interpret it as, I can't be happy at this until I'm good at it. Or you can say, I need to be, or I love this. There's no limit to how good I can get. You have those options.
We've got about 30 seconds left. How can people get in touch with you?
They can email me at tom@tomsterner.com is the best way to get in touch with me. And I do read my emails and I do respond to them. So yeah, tom@tomsterner.com, or they can also go to tomsterner.com and see what I'm about.
This has been an amazing and informative conversation. Thank you so much for sharing this with us today.
Oh, I loved it. Thank you so much, Chris, for having me on.
I'm Chris Meek. We're out of time. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.